and welcome to the second part of my little history of the Birmingham Canal Navigations, done in a slightly odd order. Now, if you remember the first part, I talked a little bit about, whilst not going on about dates particularly much, the building of the Birmingham Canal, which eventually ran from Birmingham to here in Wolverhampton. It didn't start off going off into Wolverhampton. It started off going to a place called Balls Hill, and eventually that branch off to Balls Hill also got extra branches going to, amongst other places, Walsall. And that will become relevant in a bit. But that isn't the whole BCN by any stretch. In fact, the BCN is shaped roughly like the London Underground tube station symbol. That is to say, a big circle with a line scored across the middle of it. And the Birmingham Canal, at least as it eventually ended up from Birmingham to Wolverhampton, is the line scored across the middle. Today, we're going to talk about the top half of the circle. That story starts, at least, here, Horsley Fields Junction. You see, in the 1770s, it became rapidly apparent that the Birmingham Canal was going to be an enormous success. And so, of course, other people wanted in on the act. One way you could do that would be to invest in the Birmingham Navigations, Birmingham Canal as was. But another way you could do it would be to build a rival canal. And this is where the top half of the circle begins. If you're looking at the London Underground sign, I guess it would be at the left-hand edge of the circle where the top half of the circle begins. This is the Wyrley and Essington Canal, and it was built initially as a rival to the Birmingham Canal. It went from here in Wolverhampton, opened in 1794 or so, so 20 years after the original canal opened, and it went up to the coalfields at Wyrley and also at Essington. So unlike other names of canals, it didn't go from Wyrley to Essington, except in a very literal sense. Wyrley and Essington are right next to each other, and it went from Wyrley and Essington down towards Wolverhampton. Now the problem is that, of course, it had to join the Birmingham Canal, and the good owners of the Birmingham Canal, I suppose, could have cooperated, but they absolutely did not want to. And so, when you get permission to open a canal, you get an Act of Parliament. And they couldn't stop the Act of Parliament, they couldn't prevent the canal opening. But they could sort of influence the Act of Parliament, and they influenced it to the extent that they said there had to be a stop lock, this is it, in between the Wyrley and Essington Canal and the Birmingham Canal. And if you have a look here, if we just stay out of the way of the geese and their goslings, you can see there is space for a gate and some stop planks. And then a little bit further on, there is space for a second gate and some stop planks. And then a little bit further on, there is space for a third gate and stop planks. So the reason why you have this unusual three-gate system and a very, very long lock is basically it allows for either canal to have a higher water level, so the lock can go in either direction. And the reason for this was to prevent water abstraction by the Wyrley and Essington Canal from the Birmingham Canal, although actually they had something rather cunning put into the Act, which was that if the level of the Wyrley and Essington Canal was at any point lower than 6 inches different to the Birmingham Canal, as in was less than 6 inches higher, you couldn't open the stop lock. Okay, so in other words, they had it put into the Act that the only way this lock would work is if the Wyrley and Essington Canal gave water to the Birmingham Canal. Even worse than that, they managed to put in a thing saying that it had to be 6 inches, and 6 inches is not enough to to properly seal the gates. And so essentially what they basically said is, this stop lock, you're not allowed through it, except in the winter. That's really the effect. So again, you have one of these interesting things where you're having to transfer goods from one boat to another that are right next to each other, and that could totally get the boat through, but for political reasons, they won't let you. Nevertheless, this canal was a significant success, and quite early on, they decided to extend it from maybe a third of the way around the top of the circle of the London Underground sign, and they decided to extend it all the way around to the Coventry Canal at the other side, which they did. And we shall go and have a look at that later. Before we do that, we're going to go and have a look at the bit where the canal originally went off towards its terminus. So let's pop up towards Sneyd, and we'll have a look at Sneyd Junction. So, here we are approaching Sneyd, and by 1794, this was the Wyrley and Essington Canal. It was a contour canal up to here, which means it followed the route of the land and didn't have much in the way of embankments or locks. But by the time it got here, you can see the land is dropping away. If I poke my phone that way, you can see the land is dropping away. So they had to build some locks. And we're going to come across the first of those locks in a minute. But up to here, it's so contoury and so curly that it was known as the Curly Wyrley. So originally the canal carried on straight ahead of us here and went up to Wyrley Bank with a separate branch up to Essington. And then on our right here, which we're just going to go over, there was a smaller branch which went down towards Birch Hills. In fact, almost immediately, they decided that they wanted to complete the canal through to the Coventry Canal, and thus sort of completing what you might call the top half of the London Underground Circle. And they extended it this way towards Lichfield, where the Coventry Canal was. And we'll go and have a look later at what happened to that chunk of the canal. But this was the original main line of the canal. Now, as you can see, there is a lock ahead, and as you can probably see, there is not much chance of getting a boat through the lock now, because somebody has very carelessly put a big brick wall across it. That is because this section of the Wyrley and Essington Canal is long since abandoned. There were 4 locks up to Wyrley Bank and a separate Essington branch with more locks up to Essington, which was basically a scam on the part of the guy who owned the colliery, because he never actually paid for the branch as he agreed to, and indeed tried to get an Act of Parliament pretty soon to close it down and turn it into a railway, which was denied, and he was sued several times. So the Essington branch was always a disaster from the word go. But we haven't got to the place where it splits yet. And as I say, this canal is, as you can see, somewhat dead. Fate of much of the Birmingham Canal Navigations. Although, of course, so far, this isn't the Birmingham Canal Navigations. This is a rival canal, which is heading up in this direction. I might walk up there and see if I can find any evidence of the canal a little bit further up. Let's go and have a look. So here we are, pointing back down the way I've just come towards Lock 1 of the Wyrley Bank branch, or at least the bit that will split off into the Wyrley Bank branch. Locks 2 and 3 are absolutely obliterated. This road is the canal, and they're completely gone. Lock 4, there is an extremely tiny amount of evidence for kicking around, so I'm currently standing in Lock 4, and it has been filled in with concrete, and there is here just a tiny amount of evidence of a manhole cover which goes down to the culvert. So Lock 4 is gone, but you can just about see some evidence. But Lock 5, the final one, well, that's a bit more exciting. And I use the word exciting quite wrongly, but nevertheless, I think it is. Let's go and have a look. When you are canal hunting and you are looking for locks, one thing you want to find is a flat plateau and then a short uphill section and another flat plateau, and that is what we have here. And if we wander into the grass up here, let's have a look at what we find. And what do we find? And basically I've had to do a bit of kicking of grass, but we find some slabs of stone, and on this side they go down. So we are now standing on the edge of Lock 5. I'm now in Lock 5, and it went that way. And if we walk round to the end of Lock 5, we get an even more exciting sight. But you're glad you chose to watch a video of a middle-aged man rambling around the countryside outside Birmingham. But let's have a look and see, because look what we have here. This is Lock 5, and you can see we've still got the wing walls on both sides. That's the entrance into Lock 5, albeit significantly behind a tree. And there is the canal disappearing off into the distance. There is, alas, no prospect of this ever being restored, but it is interesting nevertheless. Now, having taken that detour, time for us to go back and follow the branch of the canal which does still exist, which goes down towards Birch Hills and then eventually towards Lichfield and the Coventry Canal. Let's go and take a look. Okay, we have now come down from Sneed, or Snade as the case may be, and we have come to the end, or to nearly to the end of the Birch Hills branch, which actually wasn't terribly successful. So the Birch Hills branch goes off on the right hand side, and it was eventually closed and filled in, although the proprietors of the Wyrley and Essington Canal got onto quite a good thing and realised that if they went that way, they could open up a route all the way to the Coventry Canal in Lichfield, which is something we will look at later. However, this is 1794. We're going to jump ahead a little bit, because this branch, by the early 1800s, was useless, never had a lot of traffic on it, and it was closed. It wasn't actually filled in, but it was completely abandoned. But if we walk down here, I mean, it doesn't look hugely abandoned, does it? You can't go down it at the moment because somebody's hung a great big barrier across the way, and that's for a reason. It's rather more modern. So as we walk down here, I'll tell you a little bit about this little bit of abandoned, but not really abandoned canal. So, firstly, the reason why there is a barrier across it is that there was, and is, a company called Anachrome, and they had an industrial accident, and they have dumped 8 cubic metres of sodium cyanide into this stretch of canal. As you can imagine, sodium cyanide is not a particularly nice substance, and so this is last year they had to completely close the canal, this whole stretch, 3 chunks of it, and it killed all the fish and killed all the wildlife. They've done a huge clean-up job, and they have managed to get the canal to the position where you can now safely walk along it. But there's still quite a lot of poison in the silt, and so until they dredge the whole thing, boats are not allowed down here, and that's not going to happen, I think, for another year or so. And the environmental effects are going to be felt for many, many years to come, unfortunately. Now, I said this stretch was abandoned in the 1810s, 1820s, and it was. And the reason it was abandoned is that whilst it went close to Walsall, it didn't actually go to Walsall, and there was already a canal to Walsall. Now, if you remember from my first episode, when Brindley built the Birmingham Canal, the crosspiece of our London Underground tube map, it originally only went 2/3 of the way across the circle and stopped. And it stopped at Walls Hill. Then later they put in additional branches to Ridgeacre and to Walsall. And so there was a canal going from the Birmingham Canal all the way up to Walsall. And then there was this stub which came down the Wyrley and Essington Canal and went nearly all the way to Walsall, albeit somewhat higher up. And you would have thought that they would go, oh, here's an excellent opportunity to link the two together. But Birmingham Canal were not terribly pleased with the Wyrley and Essington lot by this point. The reason they were not terribly pleased was that the Wyrley and Essington lot had got a permission to dig a canal all the way across to the Coventry Canal, which essentially gave them the same route, i.e. from west of the Black Country to east of the Black Country, without having to pay to use the Birmingham Canal. Birmingham Canal were so cross about this that they, in fact, issued an edict saying that nobody who was employed by the canal or on the board of the canal was allowed to have anything at all to do with the Wyrley and Essington Canal. And they certainly refused to do anything so cooperative as to allow the canals to be linked together at Walsall. Well, the Wyrley and Essington Canal sort of, proposed it and nothing happened. And you get up to about 1830, so we're talking like 60 years after the Birmingham Canal is built. And eventually, they offered to provide the water, the access to the water, if the Birmingham Canal built the channel, and they offered to work together, and the Birmingham Canal having none of it, so eventually they just went and got an Act of Parliament and said, look, we're just going to build the link ourselves, at which point the Birmingham Canal had a massive and sudden change of heart. And it is this change of heart which effectively created the Birmingham Canal Navigations. Albeit, by this point, by a couple of years, they were now called the Birmingham Canal Navigations Company. And they proposed to the Wyrley and Essington Canal that they merge and form one great big link. And the Wyrley and Essington Canal Company thought that was quite a good idea. And so, in the 1830s, the whole Birmingham Canal Navigation Network was born. We now had two routes from Wolverhampton to the East Midlands, and we had the ability to make a link, which we're going to get to in a minute, between this derelict and abandoned stub of canal to Walsall. So they dug it out again, made it navigable again, and as I say, as you'll see in a minute, built the link. And from then on in, the whole network essentially grew like a fungus. It sort of put out roots everywhere, and lots and lots of extra chunks of canal were built. This isn't by any stretch the only link between the two. There is another link which alas no longer exists at Bradley Locks, and there was another link which, in an almost unbelievable act of wanton vandalism, was destroyed in the 80s. The canal, it was banned into the 60s, but right up to the 80s the channel was there, the locks were there, the chambers were there, just needed a bit of restoration, and then they completely destroyed it and built a Laura Ashley on top of it. Laura Ashley, I think, is no longer there, but neither sadly is the canal. And then they built other links between the end of the Wyrley and Essington Canal, bits of the Wyrley and Essington Canal, and other bits of the Birmingham Canal Navigations. We're going to go and have a look at those in the east of the system in a minute. Just for the moment, I shall shut up. We shall walk down towards where the first link was made between the Wyrley and Essington and the BCN in a collaboration rather than in a competition. Let's have a look and see. And so here we are at the Birchill's terminus of the Wyrley and Essington Canal. It finished literally there, where that little sort of scubby white building is. Here's the wharf. This is the winding hole. That's it, ended, finished. And then they extended it there. And you can see, of course, a lock The reason, of course, being that the Wyrley and Essington Canal is significantly higher than the Birmingham Canal. So this is the bit, the set of 8 locks they finally got around to building 70 years after both canals were built, into, no, 70 years, 40 years after both canals were built, into and down into Walsall. Unfortunately, the locks are currently closed because of, as they say, a major pollution incident. So there are no boats moving here. But if you were to follow that down all the way, you'd end up in Walsall Town Basin. So that is that for this little diversion. And then we're going to carry on. I'm going to wind backwards in time back to 1794 and find out where the Wyrley and Essington ended up. Let's crack on with that. And so I promised you a look at the area where the Wyrley and Essington Canal starts to plunge down its locks towards Lichfield and the Coventry Canal. And this is it. There's a short arm there that goes off towards Anglesey, not that one. But here is the main line of the canal, going as it does under this Horsley Ironworks Bridge, and then off down towards Lichfield. And there is only one problem with this route, which is that if we get up and have a look, we will see that this route ends about there, filled in and abandoned. Now, that's a funny old thing. I will do a whole video about this, but obviously some canals get closed over the years because they're not a great deal of use. But there was the peculiar period in the early 60s and the early 70s when the sole aim of British Waterways, or possibly British Transport Board at the time, was to close as many miles of canals as they could possibly manage. And some of it was, stuff like the Wyrley Bank we were having a look at earlier, which doesn't really go anywhere. And you've got to say that's, it's a bit sad, but kind of fair enough. But that chunk of the Wyrley and Essington Canal was a massive piece of cultural vandalism. It could have been, and would be, a really useful link and a great holiday destination. So, is that it? Does the Wyrley and Essington Canal just sort of dribble off into nowhere and then stop? Is that why there's no boats in it? Well, no. And yes, up here it stops, but the good news is that the Lichfield and Hatherton Canals Trust is working on restoring that section. It's a long old job. They've had to build an aqueduct over the M6 toll, and they've got many, many years of work to go, but they will reopen it. And it will no longer be called the Wyrley and Essington Canal. Its modern name will be the Lichfield Canal, and I strongly suggest you Google it and find out a little bit more about it, because they're an interesting group of people and they're doing interesting things. So we've got one more thing to look at in this video, and that is what happens to this canal. Does it simply peter out into nothing at the moment? And the answer is no, because when the BCN acquired the Wyrley and Essington Canal, they created several links up to it. And we're going to go and have a look at one of the last major canal projects built in the UK, astonishingly late on, and see what the fate of the Wyrley and Essington is. I'll see you at the next site. And here we are, more or less at the end of the current Wyrley and Essington Canal, and indeed the end of this video. This is a branch of the Wyrley and Essington called the Doe End branch. Had originally ended here, and it went down there. You can see off to the left there was a branch called the Hayhead branch. It doesn't go very far anymore, but it does go a little way. But by the time that the BCN was in its full swing, they had bought the Wyrley and Essington Canal, and I mentioned that they built some more links. We're going to have a look at the last link, which is called the Rushall Canal. The Russell Canal, built in 1847, so more or less one of the last narrow canals to be built. And it linked the Dowen branch, the Wyrley and Essington, down, still does, links it down to the Tame Valley Canal, which is only just a little bit older, 1844. And you can really tell the change in canal building technology from the Wyrley and Essington, which is so twisty and turny it's known as the Curly Wyrley, to the Russell, which is right at the end of the canal era. Let's go and have a look at the first lock and stand and point down the Russell Canal, and you might be able to see what I mean. This is effectively at the far right hand end of the top curvy circle of our London Underground sign, and it sort of represents the BCN at its most sort of most busy and largest extent. Now, here you go. If you can see that the Russell Canal is completely and totally, absolutely straight. It cuts straight through the countryside. Both the Russell Canal and the Tame Valley Canal are built for very, very different reasons than the Wyrley and Essington or the Birmingham canals. Both the Wyrley and Essington and Birmingham canals were essentially, where is the coal dug up? Where is the coal sold? Let's build a canal from that place to the other place. The Russell Canal and the Tame Valley Canal, by the time they were built, the routes already existed. These were basically relief roads. These are bypasses that go past the centre of Birmingham. And to that end, they're not particularly trying to wind their way to any collieries or anything. They're just sort of bypasses. So they can afford to be arrow straight, as indeed the Russell Canal is. So that's more or less the story of the top half, the northern reaches of the BCN. In the next video, I'm going to go and have a look at the southern reaches down in the south of the Black Country, places like Dudley and Oldbury, and we shall talk about that in the next video. If you like these videos, please do like and subscribe. I enjoy making them, but it will help me make more. And in any case, I shall see you guys another time. Goodbye.